Coming up, Tennessee gets some good news and Las Vegas loves Alabama. We'll talk about it all next, right here on SEC Country Live. Hello everyone and welcome to SEC Country Live. Hope you've had an enjoyable holiday weekend. Good to have you back with us. My name is Brandon Adams. This is the former Alabama All-American Mike Johnson. For the next 60 minutes, we'll talk about the SEC with you. We'll also check in Destin, Florida, where the SEC spring meetings are going on here this week. A little volatility from some of the coaches involved there. We'll talk to Mike Griffith about that, and we'll find out about how Tropical Storm Alberto, is it holding off here on the Gulf Coast there? We'll find out about all of that from Mike Griffith coming up a little bit later on.
Yeah, anytime you can get Nick Saban worked up, what is it, May 29th? That's a good time to get Nick Saban worked up over some stuff. So that should be a fun conversation.
So we'll talk to Mike Griffith about that coming up in just a moment. Before that, though, let's dive into our first and 10 here with the big news around the SEC. And item number one on our list, first and 10 here in SEC Country Live, involves some pretty good news here for the Tennessee Vols. It has been sort of kicked around, and we're going to let you hear from Josh Ward on this in just a moment, the Tennessee podcast host for us here at SECCountry.com, who really on his show did a good job of sort of laying out exactly what's been going on with the Vols of late and one of their star linebackers, Darren Kirkland. In fact, here is Josh Ward talking about where we kind of were leading up to today with Tennessee and Darren Kirkland.
Word started to travel on Monday that Darren Kirkland Jr. might be having second thoughts. Mike Griffith wrote about it on the website, and Kirkland and his family met with Jeremy Pruitt over the weekend, and Tennessee's head coach has given Kirkland something to think about, and he is reconsidering his decision to transfer. And Kirkland's a very well thought of player and essentially a coveted prospect. If he's available as a grad transfer to come in and play somewhere else right away, you can bet Kirkland started to hear something from somebody very quickly. So Jeremy Pruitt quickly turned around and spoke to Kirkland and his family, and now it looks like Kirkland might not be leaving Tennessee.
That was obviously recorded and spoken before we find out the news that I'm about to report, but I love the way that Josh Ward framed this on the podcast for SEC Country today. You know, this notion that this was a recruitment, that if Kirkland's a grad transfer, now you got to be careful when you make contact with a guy like this, but if he's on the open market, he's going to have a lot of suitors. Kirkland's a very good player. And yet for Tennessee, this is a player they'd also like to keep in the fold. And for Jeremy Pruitt, as Josh Ward kind of pointed out, it's a bit of a recruitment for him to sort of stay in the fold there. And it looks like that's exactly what Jeremy Pruitt's been able to do, because Chris Lowe, reporting for ESPN, gives us this quote from Jeremy Pruitt when it comes to a Darren Kirkland. The injury's been hard on him, but he wants to be here. We want him here. He can definitely help us. That's the quote from Jeremy Pruitt, and a story that Chris Lowe wrote for ESPN.com that essentially lets it be known that that Darren Kirkland is apparently going to stay at the University of Tennessee. How big is this for the Vols, and how much credit do you personally give Pruitt for making this happen?
I think that he deserves a lot of credit, and I think that to the credit of Josh Ward, I think this was recruitment. I mean, I really do feel that way. I feel like Jeremy Pruitt's good at recruiting players. He's good at talking his way into and out of situations. He's good at getting down on that level of a lot of the players within his program and outside of the programs he's trying to bring in. You could make the argument that Darren Kirkland is the second best player on this roster.
Yeah.
I think you could easily make that argument. And the news that he was leaving, I thought was an absolute knife shot to Tennessee fans last week. I thought it was a knife shot to the program, to Jeremy Pruitt, anything that you thought about building, because how many times on this show have we talked about, 6 wins in year one would be a good mark for Tennessee. Take Darren Kirkland out of that, your roster's a lot less talented. So I think there was a recruiting effort on Jeremy Pruitt's part. I think he deserves credit for being able to talk his way in and out of this and keep Darren Kirkland on the roster. I think there's a ton of different angles to look at. We're going to talk about grad transfers coming up a ton on this show, not only today but tomorrow. But I think there's a ton of different ways to look at it, but I don't think you can categorize this as anything but a huge win for Jeremy Pruitt if he's able to keep him around.
So let me be very careful how I categorize this, because I am in no way wanting to make any kind of accusation against Kirkland whatsoever, but I can't help but think back to the spring where Pruitt at times sort of spoke about generally being unhappy with the team. Not Kirkland in particular. We have no way of knowing kind of how he factors into all of that whatsoever, but just sort of generally unhappy with the team. Yeah. Is there a chance that somehow that Darren Kirkland, the fact that he's even thinking about leaving a team, that he would be one of the stars on, is there a chance that maybe that abrasiveness that Pruitt has sort of, and as Pruitt has described it, sort of this, blunt honesty. Is there a chance that somehow Kirkland's personality hasn't meshed too well with the way that Jeremy Pruitt's going to come in like a bull in a china shop with what's going on there for Tennessee? Is there a chance that maybe that rubbed Kirkland the wrong way a bit?
I think that's exactly what you're probably seeing. And I think that Darren Kirkland looks at it. He's been dinged up. He's been injured. He's been in and out of the lineup. He's missed a ton of starts. I mean, he's played, 2 years? He'll be a junior next year, I believe. He's still got 2 years left of eligibility. So he's missed a ton of starts due to injuries. And I think Jeremy Pruitt was saying, listen, dude, we got a ton of guys coming in, got a ton of guys coming off injuries, got a ton of people that are going to be vying for playing time. If you're not ready to get on this bus, then get out of the way. And I think that could have easily rubbed Darren Kirkland the wrong way. And I think it's a check mark in the right direction for Jeremy Pruitt. He's able to bring him and his family in and explain what he's trying to get done in Knoxville.
On YouTube, Katie McCarty says, how good can he be after like 4 knee injuries, which is a fair question to ask. But I think it's also probably fair to point out for Tennessee right now, beggars cannot be choosers. No. Tennessee needs talented players. If it's talented players who've had a history of injury, right now that's all Jeremy Pruitt has at his disposal.
Yeah, and we're talking about a guy who's still, in his second, third year college, right? I mean, he can bounce back better than sometimes you see guys in the NFL, sometimes older players. I mean, we've seen Nick Chubb do, from a catastrophic injury. We've seen guys come back that are still at this young level and still be explosive. So I know it's going to be an uphill battle for Darren Kirkland. I know that he has that little bit of that checkered injury history, but I think in this system, given what Jeremy Pruitt's going to run, I think it's going to look a lot like the linebacker positions at Georgia and at Alabama that Nick Saban and Kirby Smart use. I think Darren Kirkland can be a star given the right set of circumstances. 2
real quick comments on Facebook. Then we're going to talk about the SEC odds that were just released. Jared Seeger says he don't want to go 0-8 again. I mean, how much of this may be like we hear about some graduate transfers? They want to be a part of just a better team. You think there's a chance that Kirkland just wanted to be a part of a better situation here, and what's available at Tennessee is just not that exciting?
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how all these rules start to shake out when we talk about graduate transfers. And we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about Darren Kirkland. But if the rule does get passed that graduate transfers can move amongst the SEC, it's going to be interesting to see if that starts a trend. I think that we talk so much about the downside of it, if players leaving Georgia or leaving Alabama to go to get playing time. It'd be interesting to see the opposite effect of a guy like Darren Kirkland saying, listen, I can be a star on a football team. I might go somewhere where I can win.
Glenn Anderson, final comment on this subject for now, says it can't happen overnight, but Pruitt will turn Tennessee around. I believe he's a great guy and a great coach. And one of the things that proves that kind of stuff to me is when players are convinced of a message. This may be a case where Darren Kirkland heard the message from Jeremy Pruitt, became convinced to be a part of this process. Yeah. Keller Christ heard this message and decided to transfer from Stanford to Tennessee. We've seen some examples of this, some junior college players that had choices to go anywhere, and they chose to be a part of what's happening here at Tennessee. I don't know how successful that Tennessee's ultimately going to end up being, but I agree with the commenter here. There are clearly some players who believe that's a possibility.
And that's what's so great about Jeremy Pruitt. And we covered this last week talking about John Parker Wilson, kind of going over the way he thinks Jeremy Pruitt connects with players like this. And you mentioned Keller Christ being one of them. Madre London, the running back out of Michigan State, is another guy he's brought in. Roster management.
That's a good one. Yeah, good name.
Roster management has been something that Jeremy Pruitt has been on top of his time at Tennessee. I think he's made this roster better in the time that he's been there. It's going to be interesting to see how some of these position battles play out. But so far right now, I mean, he definitely gets a passing grade out of my book.
We're going to try to talk to Mike Griffith about this in about 10 minutes live from Destin, Florida, the start of the SEC spring meetings. Stick around for that. For now, let's do item number 2 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And Bet Online, a online sports book, has released its odds for the SEC Championship. And it's amazing. First of all, these are a bit different than some of the online odds we saw just a few weeks ago. It's also amazing to see how big of a favorite Alabama here, at what you see with plus 150 is actually, it's about 1.5 to 1. It's a little less than 2 to 1. So a huge favorite Alabama is winning the SEC Championship. You see Georgia at 3 to 1, Auburn at 7 to 1, Mississippi State at 10 to 1, Florida at 14 to 1, a little higher than Texas A&M, LSU both at 16 to 1. Then you get to South Carolina at 20 to 1. Interesting that the Gamecocks are going to be a preseason top 25 team in a lot of polls, have essentially the same odds to win the SEC from Bet Online as Missouri does. What do you make of these odds, in particular, your alma mater being such a huge favorite?
Yeah, it's a little bit skewed to me. That doesn't even become fun to bet. I mean, I think what they're telling you with these odds is they don't think that much of what Alabama's schedule will be. I mean, if you're putting it at plus 150, I mean, you're like 1.5 to 1 to odds.
Yeah.
1.5 to 1, I'm sorry. Then I don't think that tells you a lot about your schedule. I mean, obviously, their non-conference opponents are going to be, Missouri, and you're going to get another couple of quality games in there. But I think that obviously it points to Alabama running the table. I look at those odds, though, and there's a couple that jump out to me. I mean, Florida being 14 to 1 is not as far back as I thought they'd be. Mississippi State at 10 to 1. being the fourth place team, I mean, that's pretty good odds. You know, you look at teams like Texas A&M and LSU, I thought would kind of be ahead of Florida and Mississippi State at that point.
It's always tricky when you talk about odds because it's sort of hard to know how to say it the way you want to say it, what you mean.
Right.
When you say that's good odds for Mississippi State, you mean that's them getting respect from the betting public
I think
here?
so. Yeah, I think that's them getting
not
more
necessarily a
respect
great bet. 10-1 on Mississippi State for me is not a great bet. But that is a level of respect they're getting from the betting public here.
I agree with you. And you kind of look at, you know, historically what teams are kind of able to kind of get to that point. You would think a team like LSU and some of the other teams on the back end of that could, you know, it stood better chances of getting there. But I think Mississippi State is getting a ton of credit here, and I think Florida's getting a ton of credit, more than I think they would have a couple of months ago.
Clint Cunningham says, why wouldn't Alabama be a big favorite? They've dominated for the last decade. I mean, that's a fair question to ask. I guess in comparison to Georgia, though, you know, to say that Georgia's 3-1 in the East, Alabama's 1.5-1 in the West, these two teams play essentially the same schedule. They'll both host Auburn. They'll both travel to LSU. I mean, there's actually not that big of a difference in the Georgia and Alabama schedule, and yet the online betting folks here say that Alabama's way more likely to navigate it. I mean, what I saw in January were two teams that look pretty similar.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I understand why Alabama is where it is, because what you have, and I've said this a bunch of times on the show, Vegas values the consistency that Nick Saban brings. It's hard to talk about consistency. Every time you bet on something, it feels like the opposite of that thing happens, right? You can never look at consistency in sport and think it's going to last forever. But Nick Saban has tried to do that, and I think Vegas values that. I think Vegas is afraid to get burned if they make the odds any higher than that, because Nick Saban's proven that time and time again he's gonna be in the national championship picture. He's gonna be in the SEC championship picture. I think that Georgia will end up getting that respect. I don't think the rosters are that much different, but I think there is a little bit of hesitance when you look at Kirby Smart and look at the players they lost to the draft to say, oh, they're just going to land back there again next year.
Michael Shell on Facebook says, as much as I hate Florida, they always pull a decent season out of nowhere. We did see Jim McElwain probably be a little bit more successful in, say, like 2015 and 2016 than some people would have expected he might. Is there any of that Florida magic sort of hanging around in these Gators here this year? I mean, at those odds, I'm not betting them winning the SEC, but this is at least one sports book that says they expect to see Florida more in the top half of the league as opposed to the bottom half.
Yeah, here's what I've learned from Florida over the last few years, and this goes back to obviously the Jim McElwain era, even under Will Muschamp. When you have pass rushers the way they should have this year, and when you have a secondary the way they should have this year, it's hard to bet against them. If you can rush the passer in this league and be decently stout in the front seven and have guys that are lockdown corners, they're going to have a good defense. And Florida has shown time and time again that in the East, that's not as strong as the West has been historically in the last 10 years, that you can make a run. If you win the right games at the right time and play just good enough on offense, you can make a run. And I think you're seeing that be reflected in those Florida odds.
On Facebook, Charlie Adams says it's just so hard, BA, to bet against Nick Saban. It kind of is, and I guess I'll turn this back to you for a moment. When you look at Alabama, who's going to be about a 2-touchdown favorite in just about every game that it plays this season, maybe with the exception of LSU, maybe the exception of Auburn in the regular season, they'll still be a big favorite in both those games. I mean, if it doesn't work for Alabama, it's about a secondary that doesn't replace Micah Fitzpatrick. It's about an offensive line that doesn't handle some of the personnel movement. Or, and this is the thing I think the Alabama haters truly hoping for here, it ends up being about Tua Tagovailoa, just too much hype on the basis of one half of football. If you're a guy, and I'll admit, I mean, I'd love to see Alabama fall on its face this season. If that's what you're hoping for, the only thing that you can really hang your hat on is this notion that we've made a legend out of Tua on the basis of one throw on 2nd and 26.
And I don't doubt that that's possible that can happen. I mean, we're talking about a guy that really played one half against UJ and has been built up to 9-1 Heisman odds, right? You got a young wide receiver core, and there's still the chance that Jalen becomes the quarterback. But I look at it and I say, you know, there's a young secondary, they're going to get time to gel. I don't know if they'll be tested right up. I think Ole Miss is a great wide receiver core. I think that's going to be a good test. I don't know if Ole Miss's defense can get up to Bama's offense early in the year, but there is always the chance that the combination of Tua being the starting quarterback possibly, Michael Oxley, Dan Enos, that combination just doesn't work as well as you thought it would. There's always a chance for that.
On YouTube, Jonathan Jennings says Alabama's the safest bet in sports gambling, but you know, this is one of those things where I do have to stick up for Georgia a little bit. I mean, let's not forget who the reigning SEC champion is here. You know, at 1.5-1, you know, Alabama's got the better odds here, but they are not the one currently holding the SEC championship trophy.
No, I agree with you. And you have to pay your dues to Georgia, and you have to respect what Kirby Smart has built over there. You have to respect what they've been able to do offensively, defensively. The consistency they played with last year, I think, was unparalleled in a lot of different ways. So I think you've always got to give them their due respect. I just think that people are trying to wait and react to how they look without so many star players they lost.
All right, we're going to talk to Mike Griffith here in a couple of minutes. He is in Destin, Florida, covering the SEC spring meetings. Before that, though, item number 3 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. Lindell Mack Wilson, I don't know if he edited this himself or what, but he puts out a pretty cool hype video here, kind of showing off some of his highlights as a way of, I think, getting some Alabama fans excited about the upcoming season. I want us to take a look a little bit about this, and I want you to tell me, A, what you like about Wilson's game from the video that you see here, and just kind of overall, I mean, is this the guy this season that you think ends up being the major playmaker for this Alabama defense? After all, once again, we're talking about Alabama needing to replace some of those guys for the 2018 year.
Yeah, I think that's what people hope, right? I think you have to hope that when you lose guys like Sean Deion Hamilton and Rashawn Evans and so many defensive cogs that Alabama has left. I mean, the list of linebackers coming to Alabama is long, but it's not just easy enough to just plug a guy in. I mean, we saw that last year with Keith Holcomb when he comes in against Mississippi State. It wasn't the same. So having Mack Wilson back, having him healthy, you see here this star-studded like highlight really puts out. I think he's one of the biggest pieces for this defense. I think he's still kind of a young guy that's still learning a little bit, but can be an absolute defensive star. If he can pull the defensive line in and that secondary starts playing to the top of their ability, I think the sky's the limit for Mack Wilson.
Matt Markham says Mack Wilson is the truth, and I think that's the case. I think you also got to put him in that same conversation as a guy like Raekwon Davis, who really wreaked havoc on Georgia in that national championship game. But it still does come back to the topic we were just addressing a moment ago. You know, there's still that absence of a Minka Fitzpatrick-style defensive back in that secondary. And as much as you're going to see Mack Wilson flying all over the field, my guess is you probably do, there is still that curiosity of, can anybody do for Alabama what Minka did a year ago?
Yeah, no, it's something that's going to have to be answered. And I think what's interesting about it, too, and we've talked about how Bama's schedule is backloaded to a certain extent. You know, the quarterback competition might not matter until you get, really into late October, November, Auburn and LSU, Mississippi State, those kind of teams. But I got to tell you, when you look at that secondary and you look at all the new starters they're going to have, Louisville's going to try to throw the ball around. Ole Miss is near the top of that schedule. They have got an incredible wide receivers core and Jordan Ta'amu who can throw for 1,000,000 yards. So we're going to find out sooner than later at Alabama and Tuscaloosa if these corners and these safeties, if somebody can rise to the occasion and start to be a star that Minka was.
Jared Seegers also mentions the name Dylan Moses, who's one of those guys that we were already paying attention to last offseason, given the fact it was a hotshot incoming freshman. And when we saw him last year, we saw a guy that I think was very much worthy of the hype. And when you think about those star players for Alabama this season, you also think about Dylan Moses. His stature probably growing. Much the same way you think about a Najee Harris being that guy on the offensive side of the ball. I think that Moses on the defensive side of the ball is one of those guys. I mean, listen, give Alabama credit. They played a bunch of freshmen in that national championship game. And in a lot of ways, that game ends up being a bit of a foreshadow of what the future is going to look like for the Tide.
I think he was a guy that had all the athletic ability in the world, had the speed, had the explosion, just looked hesitant at times like he wasn't sure. Give it another offseason. I mean, I covered this on Roll Tide Daily a little bit last week. Athlon Sports is already calling Bama's linebacking core the #1 linebacking unit in the country. And I think that's kind of eye-popping. I mean, they did the same thing with the quarterback competition there. It's the #1 quarterback room in the country. I think that's eye-popping, but I think that tells you exactly how good they think Dylan Moses can be in the long run.
Let me check in with Destin, Florida now, the start of the SEC spring meetings. We'll get back to our SEC Country Live First and 10 in just a moment. Mike Griffith is on hand there, covering everything going down today. Want to hear from him in a moment about what Nick Saban had to say earlier today, what Kirby Smart had to say about earlier today, and the agenda on the docket for the rest of the week. But Mike, if you don't mind, let me begin with a topic we started our show with, which is, I think, good news from ESPN and everybody else. You've been doing great reporting on this. The likelihood now that Darren Kirkland going to forego his chance to be a graduate transfer, come back to the Vols here for 2018. What would this mean for Tennessee?
Yeah, it looks like Darren Kirkland will stay at Tennessee. There was some question about that, but Jeremy Pruitt has met with him. And it appears that Darren Kirkland is going to be returning to Tennessee. Jeremy Pruitt met with him and his family on Saturday night. And again, Darren Kirkland now looking like he's going to be staying with the Tennessee Vols.
Yeah, I want to talk about a little bit different topic here, Mike, because everybody's been sending me the video of Nick Saban obviously going on a little bit of a mini rant down there, at the SEC spring meetings, talking about graduate transfers. I mean, what kind of vibe did you get out of Nick Saban? Do you really seem that irritated? I've gone back and watched the video a couple times, but I think you were probably in the room with him. What did you make of that whole situation?
Yeah. Well, Nick Saban says it on him that there's a league rule in place. It out. And And why is everybody mad at him? He just wants to enforce the rule, and he says he wants it to be on a league-wide type of basis, and he'll be good with whatever the league does. But for right now, that's the rule, and he thinks they should enforce it.
What's the rest of the week looking like there in Destin? I know there's been some talk that Florida and Texas A&M are pushing the change to the transfer rule that would make a guy like Van Jefferson eligible right away here for the Florida Gators. What is on the docket here for the rest of the week there in Destin as part of these spring meetings?
Yeah. If you're wondering what's going on, there's a little bit of delay. I keep stop talking, and then I can kind of hear your voice keep going on. The rest of the week, the athletic directors are going to meet, and they're going to vote on some things. Obviously, the stadium alcohol policy is something that a lot of people are going to want to talk about. Should the schools have the right to sell alcohol across the stadium? Right now, we know it's just in the suites and in the premium seating. So I expect that to be a pretty big deal that could have a ripple effect in addition to this transfer rule. So, guys, apologies for the technical delays down here. Appreciate it. And obviously, but before tomorrow, we'll have this thing ironed out. But right now, the transfer rule and the alcohol sales, the two biggest things, I think.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing more from you and look forward to more of your reporting there from Destin, Florida. Great stuff on Darren Kirkland throughout the week here at SEC Country. And, Mike, we'll look forward to catching up with you here again very soon.
This is challenging. I don't know how they do it without live video.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith. Good stuff there from Mike Griffith, doing a great job covering the SEC spring meetings. And this is one of those things that we'll watch this stuff sort of take shape here over the next couple of days. We did talk last week about the Van Jefferson potential of him becoming eligible. Florida and Texas A&M sort of pushing that rule change there, and there'll always be an opportunity for some big time quotes to come out of an event like this too. Yeah,
no. I think the beer thing is what a lot of our audience is probably tuning into. Right? Are they going to sell beer within the audience? I mean, within they do it up in like the suites, right? At most of the schools in SEC right now. But will the general, guys in attendance be able to buy beer? I think a lot of people are focused on that.
And I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think in most cases, what you could see end up happening, is the idea of not just a, every concession stand selling beer, but has it become more of like a beer garden type thing?
Right.
The kind of thing where like you go to a certain area of the stadium to get beer. I mean, after all, as someone who's been to a million games, around SEC stadiums, in a lot of these places, the corridors in these very old stadiums are so narrow that even if the concession stands did all start selling beer, it's not like you're going to be buying a whole bunch of beer anyway, because getting in and out of these lines is not an easy thing to do, because in a lot of these very old stadiums, the corridors where the lines form is almost just too small to house much of a line.
I'm so glad you brought that up, and we're not going to go off topic a ton here, but when I attended a soccer game last year at Bobby Dodd Stadium down the street in Atlanta, the beer lines, they don't usually sell beer, so the beer lines are absolutely tearing things up and making it impossible to get to your seat. So it's definitely a good story to watch out.
For now, though, let's turn our attention back to our SEC Country Line First in 10 list, what I think is big news for the South Carolina Gamecocks, as a 5-star defensive lineman, Zach Pickens there from the state of South Carolina, made Gamecocks fans very happy when he recently announced this. Take a listen to Pickens here.
Zach Pickens from TIL in the class of 2019. I picked the school to continue to play at South Carolina.
Yes, sir. So a man of few words is Zach Pickens, but he brings a big-time reputation. This is not only the top player in the state of South Carolina, it's one of the top players in the entire country at any position, especially at his defensive end position here. This is the kind of big move, and you know that during this offseason, I've been very complimentary of Will Muschamp. I think that Muschamp is building some legitimate momentum at South Carolina, and a recruit like Zach Pickens is an example of that, taking him from Clemson, taking him from Georgia, taking him from other programs who are trying to get involved here. This is the kind of thing that Muschamp can do and is doing in a way that we're not seeing a lot of other programs in the SEC East doing much of right now.
And listen, Jamie Blanton, I was waiting on you, Jamie. I was waiting on you to call me out, and he quotes me from last week saying South Carolina just doesn't get these big-time D-line recruits. They got Jadeveon Clowney, another person or two. And up until this point, I wholeheartedly believe that is true. But Zach Pickens, it cannot be made a big enough deal for South Carolina fans. Not only did he choose South Carolina BA, but I don't know if you read this. Brent Venables was at the spring game. The Clemson defense coordinator was at the spring game, and Zach Pickens goes out of his way to pick South Carolina and say that Will Muschamp's one-on-one recruiting has meant the world to him. Will Muschamp has watched tape with him, has done so many other things. He felt comfortable at South Carolina. He felt comfortable in shutting down his recruitment, saying that he's going to be headed to Columbia. You can't talk enough about that, how big that is for a South Carolina program to keep that momentum going.
Marshall Todman on YouTube mentioning the same thing you did, that he heard that Brent Venables was in the sort of on the field when that happened. I wasn't aware of that, but that's even another dagger there for the Gamecocks. Katie McCarty also says Zach Pickens, along with Rick Sandage, who was a prize recruit for the class of 2018, and Josh Belk, who's an expected, at least maybe the point spread favorite is South Carolina for the former Clemson transfer, who we talked about last week here on SEC Country Live. I mean, if you're going to sort of concentrate talent at one position, defensive line's a pretty good place to do it. And if you want to fast forward a couple of years in the future, that is a pretty good collection of defensive linemen. Sandage was a guy that everybody wanted. Zach Pickens is a guy that everybody wants. Josh Belk was a guy who was good enough to get a scholarship at Clemson. We'll wait and find out if Belk does indeed become part of the fold here. But that gives you an example of what Muschamp is doing. Yeah. Stockpiling these defensive linemen, that's a pretty good foundation to build potentially a pretty good team.
And it's a huge foundation in terms of what Will Muschamp specifically is trying to do. And how many times have we talked about some of the elite athletes being in the state of South Carolina, heading up to Clemson, having that elite front seven they've had at Clemson, the good secondary. If Will Muschamp wants to build his defense the way he built at Florida that Jim McElwain lived off of for a couple of years, this is what it starts with. Getting pressure up front, finding these long bodies, finding these not just five-star recruits. This is an absolutely elite recruit. This is a 247 composite, .99 whatever. I mean, this guy is extremely good. He's long. He can play a number of different positions along the defensive front, and he can create havoc from anywhere.
Jamie Bland, who's a South Carolina fan, loves the fact that Brent Venables was there when this announcement goes down. Manuel Montez, though, going the other direction, saying Will Muschamp is a defensive genius, but offense he has no clue. And that is the big knock on Muschamp. And it was true going back to his Florida time. Ultimately, that's why he gets fired as Florida coach. And even after this past season, in which the Gamecocks had, I think, by almost all accounts, a successful season, it was still a year that ends with South Carolina wanting to move on from Kurt Roper, the offensive coordinator that also caused Muschamp some trouble there in Gainesville with the Gators. So now you bring in Dan Werner. You sort of promote Brian McClendon, who had been on that staff and who is a very good recruiter. All of a sudden now, this is Muschamp's year with the quarterback in place, and I think that Jake Bentley's probably a pretty good one. All of a sudden, this is Muschamp's year to correct the record about his ability to be a head coach on a team that has a good offense. That's the sort of the final ding on his resume in 2018. They say they want to play more up-tempo. This is the year in which they can change some of that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that there's a lot of focus on that, and there should be for Will Muschamp. He finally showed the ability to move on from Kurt Roper. It's something we've highlighted a couple of times in the show. Do I think it's going to be enough? I mean, I don't know that my opinion really for South Carolina, Will Muschamp, has changed this year. I do think he's a good coach, and I do think in the long run he's going to be one of the better coaches they've ever had at South Carolina. But he did have to start building from the inside out if you really wanted to start competing with the likes of Georgia and Clemson on a yearly basis.
Assuming that Pickens sticks with South Carolina, I have no reason to think he won't. This is a better player than Tennessee or Florida is going to sign in 2019.
I would have to tend to agree with that, too. And that's a big statement. But when you look at what this kid is, and there's going to be Tennessee and Florida fans out there that say that it's not possible, go look at the kid's film. He's long, he's explosive, he's fast, he's strong. He checks off all the check marks. Is going to be an elite defense. He might be their best defensive lineman when he steps on campus.
Let us do item number 5 here on SEC Country Live First in 10 list. And unless you are a Georgia fan, you've probably never heard of Trey Bishop. Bishop was a big-time recruit for Georgia in the class of 2017, but did not play in his freshman season, and really probably not a factor on the two deep here in 2018. Maybe special teams, but for the most part, this has been a story up to this point of like unrequited talent, maybe, or unrealized potential for the most part for Trey Bishop. Those are issues on the field. The issue off the field, even maybe more severe than that. Bishop charged with a felony here, and I'm going to try to keep this as PG as I can for filming a young lady without her consent, maybe passing that video around for other people to see that there, which, if true, is the kind of sort of very serious thing that Bishop's going to have to live with for the rest of his life here. And if you're a Georgia fan, you almost have to wonder the coupling of on-field, less than stellar reviews, off-field, serious issue. Is this just a case of it just not working out at UGA for Trey Bishop?
I think it is. And it's tough, too, because obviously, when somebody gets in trouble with the law, and I think we're all this way about kids at our school, you try to say, oh, man, you know what? It's a bump in the road. He's a young kid. He'll learn from. This is not a small time thing. This is a big time, felony arrest in terms of what he's going to be facing. And this is not something that's going to get swept under the rug. Yeah. This is something that's going to be drawn out. It's something that's going to be brought to the attention of not only everybody involved, but Kirby Smart, the University of Georgia, everybody else that's involved in this is going to be made known of this, and he's going to have he's going to have a tough road ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, just to be like very, very honest, and here on this show, we try to be as candid as we possibly can. I am, for the most part, in favor of pretty lenient policies for players getting back on the football field. I just think that, second chances are important in life, especially for young people. But there are some things that it's very hard to find the ground to sort of justify a second chance. And if these charges against Bishop are true, they sort of veer in that territory of, ooh, you don't really want to be caught giving that a second chance right now.
Yeah, and that's what makes it tough, is because we're at a day and age where everything is on video, where everything's on social media, and all these things are floating around there. And sometimes, the young people in and around these programs don't adjust to the level that you kind of expect on them. So it's a tough road for everybody involved in this, and I'd be interested to see what the outcome is.
On YouTube, Katie McCarty reminds us that he was Auburn's second highest rated recruit in 2017 when Georgia flipped him. So it was a big recruiting win for Kirby Smart, and from the perspective of a Georgia fan, getting Bishop was one of those things that let you know that Kirby Smart was going to have a real ability to flex as a recruiter a bit. But since being at Georgia, for whatever reason, Trey Bishop, the light just really hasn't come on. In fact, back during the spring, Kirby Smart was asked about Bishop, some of the other signees there in the 2017 class, the defensive back position, including Latavius Brini. And what Kirby Smart said is, right now he's asking a lot from these guys, and they're not necessarily delivering what he thinks they ought to be. Here's Kirby Smart talking about the now embattled Trey Bishop.
Learning progress. He and Brini both. Those are two guys I challenge every day. I mean, if you go ask them, I know y'all don't talk to those guys, but they probably wouldn't like me right now because I'm riding them. And our depth at safety is a very serious concern, and they are part of that depth. So they're not ready to play yet. And I don't necessarily think they should be ready to play, but I think they should be on their way, because where they were unique last year, you didn't see them play, but they took a ton of reps in practice. And the growth hasn't been what I want to see out of he and Brini. So I challenge them every day to, are we going to get where we can trust you to put you in the game because you're one play away? And we're not where we need to be there.
Jamie Bailey says, of course, he's got a chance to prove himself in the court of law, which is exactly what Trey Bishop ought to have a chance to do. Dre Dre, I apologize if I mispronounced that on Facebook, also saying kind of the same thing of, hey, let's give this young man a chance to defend himself. And I'm all about that. Get the best lawyer you can, go out there and present your case and your side of this, and I'm sure he'll give a chance to do that in the court of law. Yeah. But the allegation does not look very good for Bishop.
No, I mean, the allegation, paired with what Kirby Smart's point there was about his playing time and his outlook at Georgia right now, I don't think that's a really promising situation either way you kind of slice it. And so it'll be interesting. And I'll ask you this too. Let's go the football route. Georgia better than anybody. I mean, what kind of pressure does this put on the guys that would have been in front of him in terms of the depth chart this year?
I mean, listen, I'd love the thought of Trey Bishop sort of cracking that too deep and making it hard on somebody else, but there's a lot more defensive backs probably at Georgia in line to earn playing time. Maybe as a special teams player, Bishop could have made an impact, but as a defensive back in 2018, that wasn't likely to occur. Let's shift gears here and talk about item number 6 here on our SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And more video emerging from Florida quarterback Felipe Franks doing the one thing that we know Felipe Franks can really do. It's actually a pretty interesting video here. It's some sort of quarterback camp. Look there in the background. You see Jacob Eason standing right there in the background, and here's Felipe Franks once again just slinging it, man. This looks like one of those old Powerade commercials or something. Yeah. Like he's going to throw the ball out of the stadium. I mean, look, he obviously had the big, game-winning throw against Tennessee a year ago where he threw the ball very much like that. This is a Florida team that, there's a lot not to like about a lot of these quarterbacks in the roster. I mean, ultimately, does it just come down to the fact that the arm talent that Franks has is just superior to the other guys right now? Is that ultimately what's going to win Felipe Franks this job if he does indeed win it?
If he does indeed win the job, then I think it has everything to do with physical traits. I mean, I really do. I think he's tall. I think he's got everything you can ask out of a quarterback. I think obviously he can throw it a mile. That, to me, doesn't always equal success at the quarterback position. I mean, we've seen a ton of people that can throw the ball a quarter mile and have not ended up being good quarterbacks in high school. I mean, in college. I think, to me, that it does come down to physical traits in a lot of different ways. I think if Kyle Trask wins, he's not as physically gifted as Felipe Franks. So if Kyle Trask wins, it's going to say, oh, it's cerebral. He's able to get through his reads. He fits into Dan Mullen's system better. Felipe Franks wins. He's got a ton of arm talent. He knows a little bit more of the system. He's got game experience, and it's going to come down to those two teams being weighed out.
I feel like this is one of those things, and we brought this up the other day. I don't know if you agree with me or not. I think you kind of partially didn't. But we had a video of Emory Jones kind of doing the same thing. And I don't think Jones threw it as far as Frank's just threw in that video, but he threw it pretty far, and it was in the indoor facility, and Tyree Cleveland caught the football there. And I remember saying the fact that he's working with Cleveland to me is an indication of how a lot of these these players feel about Emory Jones, the quarterback. And I do sort of think, if you let me eavesdrop on one of these practices early in August, I mean, listen, if I'm watching practice, I have no idea what I'm looking at. I couldn't tell you the playbook. I couldn't tell you anything. But I'm going to be able to tell you who the quarterback for Florida is based on who gravitates towards whom here. You know, Frank's got the big arm, but do players move in his direction? You know, Emory Jones, the incoming freshman, you know, his mom has even said she'd be okay with him being sort of treated slowly. But if the players are moving in his direction, sort of gravitating around him, ultimately he's going to be the quarterback for Florida. I mean, isn't that ultimately the way this thing's going to be decided? And some of y'all were actually at these Florida practices because a few of them during the spring were open. And maybe if you're a Gators fan, you can say, you know what, people were huddled around Emory Jones all the time, or people were huddled around Felipe Franks all the time. For me, that's ultimately what's going to determine, as a hint and a clue of who the Florida quarterback is. Quarterbacks are leaders, and leaders have a magnetism. The way that you know someone's a leader is they have followers behind them. And, you know, if you're leading but nobody's following, you're just taking a walk. I mean, at that point in time, I mean, you're going to be able to judge this Florida quarterback by that, right?
I think there's some of that goes into it in my book, but I think there's also a chance for Dan Mullen to look at both these quarterbacks and say, okay, Kyle Trask is our quarterback, and then guess what? People are going to start huddling around him. People, you know, the wide receivers that want the ball, guess what? They're going to be Kyle Trask's best friend. You know, I think it kind of works cyclical like that in a lot of different ways, and I think that there's some looking into that in certain situations, but I don't think at Florida right now it's one of them. I think you have Florida players that are hungry to win, that were tired of seeing some of the things you saw out of the quarterback for the last couple of years, and want to be able to win on the football field. So I think they would rally around somebody else given certain conditions.
It is not pretty in the comment section, and some of this is friendly fire actually coming from Florida fans, Rick Keene included, who says, I think it's great that he can throw the ball through a brick wall. As a Florida fan, I just wish he could hit the wall.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, I think a lot of Florida fans say the same thing.
Yeah.
Kevin Blackman says anybody can throw in a stage setting, waiting until the dogs are back there with him. And much along the same lines, Malachi Morgan says, it's going to be awesome watching him throw 70 miles per hour fastballs between the numbers to the other team's defensive backs. Stephen Early, a little bit more of an analytical point, who says, Franks doesn't throw people open, doesn't read defense, doesn't do much other than fancy feet around and throw Hail Marys. When's the last time you saw Florida won a game and impressed by his play? And to a certain extent, you almost wonder, because you do have the big arm, it's almost like I don't know, you know, like the offensive lineman who's just way bigger than everybody else in high school. This one talent that you have, are you too enamored by that if you're Franks and you're not working on those other aspects of your game enough?
No, I think Jared Seeger goes a little bit too far here. He says Mike Johnson can outrun Franks. Now, I was pretty fleet of foot back in my playing days. I don't think I can outrun the guy right now.
It depends on they have those phony pro wrestling refs at the spring game to let Mike stay open after he gets tagged down the way they let Franks back in the spring game there.
I don't know that I could outrun the guy, but I do agree, you know, as far as like moving around the pocket and other things, I don't know that he was as fluid as some of the other people that we see can play quarterback at Florida right now. So I agree with you. I think that, you know, when you look at his arm, when you look at the fact that he was a big recruit, and you look at the fact that he's played games, all those things are going to point in his direction. But I think that will say a lot more about Kyle Trask if Kyle Trask is in the end able to overcome all those things and still win the job.
All right, let's do item number 7 here, SEC Country Live First and 10 list. And so I think this is a pretty interesting topic, and I'm not quite sure we're going to be on the same side of this or not. So Casey Clausen is now a high school coach, was photographed the other day wearing a hat that looked very much like the Alabama A, obviously Clausen, the former Tennessee quarterback. This would just be an unpardonable sin. Let me give you some social media evidence of this. On the right, you see the original tweet with the original photo. The fan says, please tell me that's a Braves hat and not a damn Bama hat. Come on, Casey. And then Sean Fincham here comes back with, I guess this is the logo from the school that Casey Clausen's coaching at, Bishop Alamany, if I pronounced that correctly, which is using the Alabama script A. In the way that you know the difference, as you pointed out before, the script A has the tail coming off the top for Alabama, whereas for the Braves it does not. So what do you make of this? For me, even though this is the former Tennessee quarterback wearing his high school hat where he coaches, as opposed to the Alabama hat, I still feel like Tennessee fans are within their rights as fans saying it's a no-no even wearing that logo whatsoever.
No, I don't think so. I don't think Tennessee fans feel that way at all. And obviously, as always, you guys will let us know in the comment section.
Hold on, you Tennessee fans were roasting him on social media for
I
this.
know, but I don't know that. I mean, it's not a bad thing to me. Wear your high school's hat. He coaches at the high school. He's not supposed to say, boy, we can't wear that hat. You know, we got to move on to a different hat.
So if you started coaching at, I don't know, some high school whose initials were like AU. And like you're the coach, you're the offensive line coach. It's Allegheny, upper or something like that. AU, and they got the AU. You tell me you're putting that hat on, you're wearing that thing around, and being photographed wearing that hat. It's the place where you coach, but it's the AU logo.
You're gonna put it like that,
or it's that big orange Power T logo.
I mean, he went to the high school too, but I see what you're saying. It would be a tough pill to swallow. Now, the logo I think I could wear. If it was the same colors, then I think we might start drawing a line. I don't know if I could ever put on that orange color and feel good about it.
Esteban Estevez says Alabama stole the logo from the high school, just like they steal everything else. That's not true. Surely Alabama had the logo first, right?
Listen, I'd love to sit on here and say, boy, you're crazy, but I really have no idea. The block A used to be the Alabama thing until, 20 years ago?
This is something I actually have a serious problem with. This is way more serious than I should take this, but it actually drives me crazy, all these high schools that do nothing but essentially just like photocopies, Xerox, like famous logos, like the script Alabama A, or like all kinds of like professional sports logos and things like that. These high schools just use these things with impunity. Doesn't that sort of drive you crazy? I mean, shouldn't you have your own like authentic, genuine logo as opposed to just sort of stealing the Alabama script A?
In a way, yeah, but you know what? There's so many high schools out there, and they don't have graphics departments and all this thing. We used to, we're the Eagles in high school. We always had like the Philadelphia Eagle, looking kind of logo. But I have no problem with that, man.
But don't you want your own like identity?
Not really. I mean, there's so many high schools. I mean, how many high schools out there are called the Eagles? You know what I mean? So like, it's gonna happen sooner or later.
Bernie Rumbley on Facebook says, "I got no problem with it. Roll Tide." But you're an Alabama fan. Imagine how a Tennessee fan must feel about this. Corey Tester, though, on the other side says he's evolved for life. Let him coach. It's just a hat. I guess what I'm saying is, can you not have enough sense to wear a hat that's not? I mean, it's one thing to wear it on a Friday night on that field. It's another thing as a guy that's going to be photographed out in public. I mean, this is an insult to a lot of Tennessee fans.
Logan Westerman's cracking me up over here on YouTube. He said, if Bama had it first, they would sue this high school. Bama slaps grandmas making quilts with the script A on them. Listen, I can't tell you how many, sometimes like they're like suing bakeries and things like that, the cease and desist, that does get on my nerves.
Tyler Mann on YouTube, by the way, brings up a good point. Alexander Raines kind of saying the same thing. If I'm talking about like genuine, authentic logos, the Georgia G is not the most authentic.
I read it. I wasn't going to say it. You guys are all over it. I read it.
So the Green Bay, the truth is, I don't even really know the history. Does the Green Bay Packers? It has to predate Georgia, right?
Yeah, it has to predate it. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's some Georgia fans out there that know that, but the Packers are so.
The Georgia uniform is way better looking than the Packers, though. Way better looking.
I don't know. I think there's something classic about the Packers uniforms.
The bottom line here is, and this is the last thing, you're not wearing a Tennessee Power T hat, and you're not wearing an Auburn hat. You're not doing that.
If it's just a logo and it's different colors, I'm wearing it. And obviously, I struggle with my colors, so you guys will have to tell me what Casey Clausen's doing. I don't know if that's crimson or not, but if it's a different color and the same logo, I can do that.
Now, if you gave me the choice about wearing a rival logo as a hat, or taking the hat off and showing that bleach blonde hair that he was somewhat famous for having, I'll go with the hat any day of the week at that point in time. Item number 8, SEC Country Live first and 10 list. So, former Alabama wide receiver and now Atlanta Falcons wide receiver Julio Jones, who is, by the way, in a bit of a contract dispute with his NFL team right now, was in L.A. coming out of a West Hollywood restaurant, and he was stopped by TMZ. It's sort of a wide-ranging conversation on a number of subjects. One of the things that comes up is Jones' excitement about now teaming up with another former Alabama wide receiver, Calvin Ridley. And it sounds like Jones is looking forward to this. Here's some audio from a conversation that Julio had with TMZ.
Are you excited to have Calvin Ridley on the team?
I'm very excited. I'm very excited. So much I can teach him. He's a raw talent, very talented guy. But coming to the next level, it's always good to have an older head guy in there to help you and teach you the ropes.
You're a lead as well.
Oh yeah, no doubt. It's gonna be good, man.
You can teach him to be the next elite guy.
The only thing he has it. He already has it. He's built by Alabama, went to Alabama, man. Everything
Roll
about
Tide.
it. Roll Tide. He gonna come with it.
I don't believe a word of that. I don't believe a word of that. Now, I like the fact that if you're an Alabama fan, you probably love the whole built by Alabama thing he throws in there. Julio Jones is not excited about having Calvin Ridley on the same team as him. He thinks Calvin Ridley's coming there to take his job, or at least a threat to do that. This is not Crimson Tide love between two guys who share the same alma mater here. This is Julio Jones worried and concerned that the younger.
You are so wrong. You're so wrong about this.
This is survival of the fittest, and Julio Jones sees a young, strapping tiger that may be coming in to take his meal.
Julio Jones is the best wide receiver in the NFL. Like, Julio Jones is not focused on Calvin Ridley right now. Julio Jones is focused on not being double-teamed anymore. Julio Jones is focused on getting touches in the red zone, in the end zone. scoring touchdowns. He's not focused on Calvin Ridley taking his job. I think he understands that the better that Calvin Ridley is and Mohamed Sanu and everybody else on that offense, the less focus that'll be, the less attention that'll be paid to Julio Jones. So I think he's right. It's just, listen, I was there when Julio was drafted underneath Roddy White, and Roddy White went about that approach the same way. He said, listen, if Julio Jones comes in, takes the top off the defense, it makes my job that much easier, and I can go for 1,000 yards receiving.
I'm getting hammered in the comment section. I'll read some of these. Malachi Morgan says, man, this duo is going to absolutely light it up. Drew Stanley says, BA, you're so wrong about that. James Perkins says, whatever, BA. Matt Markham says, BA is delusional. Van Bird says, but we hadn't heard from Van in a while. He says, Julio is not worried about Calvin Ridley. Drew Stanley says he's going to be in the slot instead of lining up outside. Esteban Estevez says Saban's going to hang the high school. Oh, that's a different topic. We'll get back to that in a moment. Stephen Early says that Julio Jones has so much money he genuinely does not care. Here's the thing, though. And, like, obviously, I'm not the world's biggest NFL fan, but we've seen already examples of this already this offseason. Ben Roethlisberger unhappy about that Oklahoma State quarterback. Joe Flacco unhappy about Lamar Jackson coming in. The NFL is one of those leagues where once you get to be too expensive, teams start looking to move on from you. You say that Julio Jones has been the best wide receiver in the NFL? That's probably true. It may even still be true for 2018. And the commenter who said that Ridley plays in the slot, that may be true. But you do not draft a guy 23rd overall, where the Falcons draft pick was. You don't draft that guy to play in the slot for his entire career. You put him there for a while, and then he replaces Julio Jones eventually. And Julio Jones knows that. He's aware of that. These veterans are always looking over their shoulder at the rookie that's coming in to take their job. So I love the idea that, Julio's in West Hollywood, or WeHo as they call it on TMZ. I love that he's out there, showing a little love to the Built by Bama concept here. Julio Jones is as jealous as he can be of Calvin Ridley.
I don't know how else to attack this. I disagree with it, because you're talking about quarterbacks. You're talking about Joe Flacco. There's one position. You can only have one quarterback on the field. Julio Jones is better off with Calvin Ridley on the field. Not only that, but anybody that's a Falcons fan out there heard Arthur Blank a couple of days ago say Julio Jones will be a Falcons for life. He's going to follow right behind Matt Ryan. He's going to be a Falcon for life. They're going to make sure they pay him whatever is necessary to make sure he gets that done. Julio Jones is not worried about Calvin Ridley. Julio Jones is going to coach up Calvin Ridley and say, you know what? I'm better off in the end. Whether or not it's in Atlanta or somewhere else, I'm better off in the end with other good wide receivers on the field.
Beaumont Airy says, believe one thing. Pros won't mentor out of job security. School loyalty might be the only thing to make a star mentor a younger player. The truth is, I don't even think that Julio Jones is going to mentor Calvin Ridley with his heart into it. He's going to say the right thing. But this guy's going to be out there mentoring. He's not. This guy's fighting for his money. He took all the Falcon stuff off his social media. I mean, y'all like this is not a business.
No, he's angling for money. I have no doubt about it. But that's why I brought up Arthur Blank's comments saying, listen, Julio Jones ain't going nowhere. This is one of those things. He's just angling for more money. Julio Jones is a lot of things, but number one, he's not stupid. And he understands the ins and the outs of playing the game of football at the highest level. He understands when he's been good, when it's been tough on him. He knows when he's been double-teamed. He knows when it's been tough in the red zone. And Calvin Ridley is another piece. I think that Julio would have lobbied for this to start up. Like before the draft, I guarantee you Julio, if he ever talked to Thomas Dimitroff, was like, go get Calvin Ridley and let's help out this passing attack.
But y'all are hammering me over this. All I'm saying is,
have my back out there.
All I'm saying is, this is a business. They may find a way to coexist, but there are real feelings underneath whatever Julio Jones is telling TMZ, and those aren't his real feelings.
Now, I will tell you this much. If this was like when I was drafting the league, we didn't have the rookie salary pool and all that, and you had to go out and pay these rookies. They were like, the rookies were always like the highest paid players in the league. That would have been a lot different thing. But Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones can both be on contract as wide receivers for the Falcons, and Calvin can play out his entire rookie contract, and Julio still be happy.
Just last thing on this. I mean, you're a perfect person to ask this. Falcons drafting an offensive lineman. He's a little taller than you, a little more handsome than you. I mean, it's like you can't help but look over your shoulder and saying, I mean, there is just this sort of natural jealousy that comes in there.
Yeah, but my career is a lot different than Julio Jones' career, right? I mean, this guy is at least, and you guys are arguing about in the comment section, at least a top 3 wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, I don't think anybody can dispute that. So he stands on different ground. It's almost like Aaron Rodgers getting mad about a backup coming in. It is what it is, and I think that he's better off for it in the end. And tutoring that guy will be something he'll do.
Item number 9, a sort of recap on a story we've dealt with before. It involves Dakereon Joyner, the incoming freshman quarterback from South Carolina. And we talked today about Tommy Luganbill, the ESPN analyst, who said that he thinks that Joyner ought to switch to wide receiver. He'd have a very good career. We actually quoted Brian McClendon on this subject, saying that for now he really views Joyner as a quarterback, and Will Muschamp is kind of waiting on the same thing. We got a quote here 24/7 Sports catches up with Muschamp during one of these spring speaking tours. We've quoted a lot of these here on SEC Country Live as of late. He says that about Joyner, he has higher expectations in himself than anyone in the room. He's progressing extremely well. He's done a really good job for a high school senior to step in on the field in the Southeastern Conference and compete against really good players. I'm really proud of his progress. I think Dakereon has a very bright future at the quarterback position here at South Carolina. That's Will Muschamp via 24/7 Sports. It's worth pointing out that maybe the spring did not go great for Muschamp, or I should say for Joyner necessarily at the quarterback position. But he gets a bit of an endorsement there from Will Muschamp. I mean, what do you make of this? For me, this is one of those somewhat hot-button topics in that I do not like when coaches say, hey, come to our program, we'll give you a chance to play quarterback, and then they sort of hope that the player kind of comes to his own conclusion that another position is better for me. There's a level of disingenuous recruiting about that I do not like. We obviously don't know if that's what's really going on here with Dakereon Joyner. Maybe Will Muschamp does intend for him to be one day the quarterback of the future once Jake Bentley's career is done. But, I mean, as a former player, what do you make of Muschamp here on what is, for Joyner, a pretty personal topic?
I like his words here, and I really do. And when we covered this topic a few weeks ago, when we were talking about Brian McClendon's words, this to me has to be that guy's decision, the athlete's decision. You can't have a coach say, boy, you need to move here, you need to move here, you're going to have to move here. It's the player that has to make a decision. So for Will Muschamp to back him up to this point and say, boy, you know what, since he's been here, he's made a lot of progress. I think he has a great future at the position. I think that's all you can ask Will Muschamp. I think that's all you can ask him to say at this point, to say, listen, all I know is this guy is a quarterback in our program. He's been working his butt off. No one expects more out of themselves than he does, and he's going the right direction. So for right now, I think it's okay for Will Muschamp to say that. He understands what he has going on at the quarterback position. He is secure with what they have this coming season. He's going to be secure with what they have the next season. And I think that it allows some time for Dakereon Joyner to figure out what he wants to do. And Will Muschamp, I think he would have been worse off had he said something to the effect of, I don't know if he's coming along very well.
There are a few high-profile stories where a player was told you don't need to play quarterback and end up being a huge mistake. I want to say that Mac Brown, the former Texas coach, was sort of famously involved in a lot of these. Yeah. You know, guys like Johnny Manziel and RG3 and all these like really good college quarterbacks. I think Texas wanted them to play other positions. That ends up being sort of a bad look for Mac Brown. But for the most part, those kinds of stories are the outlier. For the most part, if a bunch of people are telling you, you know what, maybe you'd be better off playing a different position, then the odds are you'd be better off playing a different position.
I think so, but there's just this thing for me where it's got to be that guy. Like, it's got to be Dakereon Joyner that makes that decision. It can't be somebody else telling you, because in the back of his head, he's going to go to that next position, that meeting room, and he's going to say to himself, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm a quarterback. I've always been a quarterback. It's the same thing with Jalen Hurts' dad coming out and saying it. You know what? Everybody thinks position change, all this, too. My kid's a quarterback. Jalen's a quarterback, and he's going to play quarterback. So it has to be that guy that can come to terms with it.
Okay, so I agree with you on that. It's, you know, sort of a period of self-discovery when you figure out for yourself, you know what?
Yes.
People are telling me this, but I now see this for myself. However, isn't there a problem when you end up choosing a school? And listen, I'm not an expert on Dakereon Joyner's recruitment, but if you chose a school because they said you can play quarterback, when the coaching staff maybe sort of privately thinks, well, maybe eventually he'll realize there's a better position for him. I don't like that kind of recruiting. I don't know enough to accuse South Carolina of that in this regard, but just in general, we see this play out a lot. We're like, hey, come here, you can be a quarterback, and then hopefully you'll figure it out for yourself that you need to go play defensive back or wide receiver. I just don't like that kind of recruiting. That's the brand of recruiting I'd like to see out of the sport.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I definitely agree with you on that extent. I think that college coaches look at it and recruiters look at it and say, whatever I have to do, my roster has got to get more athletic, right? So they're gonna. I don't care what position you think you ought to play. I'll come in and let you play whatever position you want to because it makes the roster better. But I'm with you. At some point, you know, these coaches have to be held accountable for what they're saying to some of these recruits. And it's like I said, if he told Dakereon Joyner he can play quarterback and Will Muschamp saying he's progressing, then I'm in Will Muschamp's corner on this.
Hardwired to Self-Destruction on YouTube says that BA looks like the dude I fended off bullies for in high school. Let me tell you something. I only wish there'd have been a hardwired for self-destruction. My problem in high school was I didn't have anybody to fend off the bullies. Maybe the reason why I'm so, the way that I am now is because of the abuse I took in the past. I think I needed a hardwired for self-destruction to be a tag team partner, probably.
Hardwired, that's good stuff, buddy. Boy, I've never heard it quite put like that, man, but that's good stuff coming from the comment section.
If only you would have been there to have my back.
Oh, that's good.
Let's do item number 10 here, SEC Country Live first and 10 list. Georgia has lost its third-string quarterback. Stetson Bennett, the former walk-on who worked his scout team a year ago and was universally praised by virtually everybody in the Georgia defense as helping Georgia get ready for some of its biggest games. Well, he's decided that maybe he's going to go junior college route and maybe hop on as a scholarship quarterback somewhere else here as soon as 2019. Recently, Kirby Smart was asked about his intent to keep Bennett on campus, maybe even offering him a scholarship. Kirby Smart said they were working hard to try to keep Stetson in the fold. Here is what Kirby said then.
We need to keep Stetson there and help us. We don't really have many other guys, to be honest. We've got 2 young quarterbacks coming in. They're going to be walk-ons that we think are good players. But we've invested a lot in Stetson with the development he took this spring and what he did in bowl practices, and excited to see what he can do. And we're encouraging him to stay so that he gets that opportunity. But I certainly respect what he's done this far for the University of Georgia. And he's a really good student as well. So we're selling him on the University of Georgia education.
So this is sort of a classic off-season story in that during the season, there's a very good chance you'd have never even heard Stetson Bennett's name. Jake Fromm is thought to be a really good starter. Justin Fields is a former 5-star as a backup, and both those guys will probably play. If they stay healthy, no one in this audience, would have, other than Georgia fans, would have ever even heard Stetson Bennett's name. And yet now he's gone. Now the third-string quarterback for Georgia is, well, your guess is as good as mine. Yep. So as an outsider to the Georgia program, I ask you, how big of a deal is it to have virtually no third-string quarterback?
I think, to me, it's like you're not having a backup kicker, right? Yeah. It's not a big deal until it is a big deal. And I think that all Georgia fans are very hopeful, as they should be, that this is not a big deal.
I guess I would point out, though, that quarterbacks get hurt more than kickers do, though.
Right.
That you go through seasons with quarterbacks getting hurt a lot. If a kicker gets hurt, then something bad has happened.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like,
if
your starting kicker pulls his groin, in practice kicking too much pulls his groin, and you don't have any at all backup kicker on the roster, then you're in a bad spot. You're going for a lot of fourth downs inside the red zone.
Right.
I just think that it kind of goes along that, and I don't want to ruffle any Georgia fans' feathers, but I got to give Nick Saban credit on his roster management. Goes out and signs a quarterback from last year's class this weekend in Lane Hatcher.
Explain more of this, because this is a perfect sort of dovetail to what Georgia now, lack of quarterback depth. Saban for the moment's got 3, if you count Hurts along with Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa, and now he wants another that was gray shirting at Arkansas State. What is this?
This kid was offered a preferred walk-on to Alabama. I covered this on Roll Tide Daily today. This guy's name is Lane Hatcher. He was offered a preferred walk-on spot at Alabama. Decided he was going to play at Arkansas State and gray shirt. Had offers from Arkansas State, Murray State, a couple of other small schools. Nick Saban goes back in the 2018 recruiting class, says, I'm not comfortable with what we have in the quarterback room right now. If one of our guys leaves, all of a sudden we're left with 2 quarterbacks, and I'm going to bring in somebody that can at least be serviceable in these different roles. And I think that's important to do because it's, like I said, it's not a big deal until it happens. But Georgia fans know just as good as anybody from last year that all of a sudden, one game in, your quarterback can tear his knee up, and all of a sudden you need a month. You have to have somebody in that backup role. It's going to be interesting to see what Kirby Smart's able to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. And as Van Bird points out, Georgia lost its starting quarterback in game 1 a year ago. So this is not like a off-the-wall question for Georgia necessarily.
No, it's something that Georgia fans are very familiar with, and I think it's going to I can't wait to see how Kirby navigates these waters, because I think this is a tough situation, especially in today's college quarterback landscape, right? It's just hard to find people that are going to jump on behind a freshman in Jake Fromm, now it'll be a sophomore in Jake Fromm, and a freshman in Justin Fields that are all world players and want to come in behind that. You're just not going to be able to find anybody that does that. So who can they get on the roster that can be serviceable? And I'm not saying to carry them to a championship. I think if your top 2 quarterbacks go down, then your championship hopes have probably gone out the window. But somebody who can at least come in, if both of those guys have to miss 1 game and come in and at least be able to hand the ball off.
All right, we'd like to close the show the same way every day. We are always on the lookout for champions of life, and today this is pretty cool. It's not so much funny as it is sort of amazing. Take a look at this video capture of this minor league baseball player who goes all out to haul in a foul ball here. Watch this. So over there on the left field side there, young man leaps the fence. God. And stays on his feet and makes the throw. I mean, are you kidding me?
Wow.
What an unbelievable play that is.
Good for I don't ever watch these videos before we see them on just because I want to react. That is absolutely incredible right there.
Now, my understanding is, to be playing minor league baseball, he's something of a prospect. what my advice would be to a prospect like this is no minor league foul ball is worth the effort you just put into it. Now, I love the idea of you giving it 100% here, being Charlie Hustle, but your career and your future may be worth a lot more than this one particular foul ball is.
His career and future could have taken a step forward with that, though. The general manager up there at the in the big leagues goes, boy, look at this kid right here. He's going viral.
Malachi Morgan says, I can't even land on my feet stepping off a sidewalk, and he does that mess. Malachi, listen, I know exactly what you feel 100%. All right, thanks for being with us here today on SEC Country Live. We'll have the podcast for you up right when we are done here. You can check out the audio version of the show. You can also share the show with your friends on YouTube and Facebook. Let them know that we're talking about the SEC here each and every afternoon. We will see you back again tomorrow afternoon, 3 p.m. Eastern Time, for another episode of SEC Country Live. Y'all have a great day.